Sheila Gunn Reid for Rebel News, and I'm here in beautiful downtown Calgary. I'm at the McDougall Centre, and I'm sitting opposite someone who I think is the greatest opposition Justin Trudeau has ever faced in his nearly 10 years in office. That is to say, I'm sitting across from Alberta's Premier, Danielle Smith. Premier, thank you so much for agreeing to sit down to this interview with me. Let's get right down to it, shall we? Today, you announced the new interdiction patrol team in southern Alberta to patrol for illegal guns, drug smuggling, human trafficking. Now, critics say that this is just pandering to Donald Trump. How do you address those concerns?
A couple things I'd say is that we've known for some time these were problems. So if you look at when I came in, one of the first announcements we made was a collaboration with Paul Brandt on human trafficking, which is a serious issue internationally. And he's got his Not in My City campaign that we wanted to make sure that we partnered with him on. We have also faced a very serious overdose crisis with opioids and illegal fentanyl, to the point where we've created an entirely new model for delivering a recovery-oriented system of care. But the flip side of that is that we've got to stop the people who are victimizing those who are drug addicts. So I had asked Mike Ellis, my Public Safety and Emergency Services Minister, to create new specialty sheriff teams. And we've created a specialty sheriff team already. That it is our scan team that shuts down drug houses. They're shutting down one almost every week in communities all over Alberta, as well as the surveillance team that works in collaboration with their other police counterparts, as well as our fugitive apprehension team, which has been very successful. And he was in the process of training up for two other new teams that I asked him to do, which is a specialized fentanyl sheriff team and a specialized border team. I asked him to do that last July. So we knew that this was a serious issue for Canada, for Alberta in particular. And it just so happens that because it's a priority for the U.S. administration, we accelerated our plans. We were going to announce it in March, so we were able to get it through Treasury Board and announce it early. And I think that people should realize that it may well be that it's a U.S. priority, but it should be a Canadian priority too.
I'm glad you said that, because cracking down on illegal human trafficking and drug trafficking is, of course, in Canada's best interest. Why do you think the Prime Minister is so reluctant to fix that problem and is instead talking about a trade war?
Well, I think that sadly, the two of the things that have created the problems that we have today are federal decisions to allow for safe supply experiments in British Columbia in particular, which has added hundreds of millions of dollars of illegal high-powered opioids into the market and turned out to be a total failure, to the point where we're now seeing British Columbia taking more of a recovery model approach, and they want to do compassionate intervention as well. So I think that is a validation of the approach that we've taken, plus the revolving door on bad guys in going in and out of jail. It's been an incredible frustration for our chiefs of police to go out, apprehend somebody, and then they're back out on the street before they've even processed the paperwork. And so we managed to get some tightening up of what was Bill C-75, but it's not working. Clearly, we're continuing to see some of the worst offenders getting back out and reoffending. And so I would say that, unfortunately, it's been some of the federal decisions that have created the crisis that we have today. And now it falls on to the provinces to do something with our power over policing to address it. And this is the best thing that we know how to do.
Now, since the election of President Trump, you've taken a real active role in building stronger relationships with your American counterparts and the incoming administration. At the same time, these are my words, not yours. I would suggest that Justin Trudeau is making active steps to undermine a lot of the work that you're doing by running off at the mouth about Trump. Now, over the past year, opinion polls have put Trudeau at least 20 points behind Poilievre. Do you think that Trudeau is talking about a trade war because he'd rather campaign against Trump than Poilievre, so that he has somebody else to blame for the carnage that exists in the Canadian economy right now?
I sure hope that what we're seeing is just a lack of discipline in messaging. And I hope it's not deliberate to try to antagonize the American president, because we can't win that game. I mean, they're a $27 trillion economy. We're about a $2.7 trillion economy. Any kind of tariff war will be crippling to us. It might hurt them in certain key areas, but it will be crippling to us. So that's why I've taken the approach of, let's accept what the American people decided. They put the US president in the White House, and they also gave him the Congress as well. And so he has a mandate to move forward, and that's what he's doing. And if his mandate includes making sure that we're taking serious efforts to address our border, then we should take that seriously and address that as well. I think that I would like to see a whole lot more conversation around our joint interests rather than saber rattling around tariffs. I told my counterparts when we had the call, and I'm happy to say so publicly, tariffs only hurt consumers. 25% tariff on all goods coming into Canada just makes all of those products more expensive. Even using the examples that Justin Trudeau talked about, 25% more expensive for bourbon or ketchup or playing cards or cherries. It hits Canadian consumers. And same in reverse, but that's where I think we have our strongest arguments to make. A 25% tariff on oil will end up increasing the cost of gasoline by $1 a gallon. That is going to have an influence on American consumers at a time where the U.S. president has also promised to bring consumer prices down. So I say that we lead with strength. We lead with talking about how Americans benefit from our energy, how they benefit from electricity, how they benefit from critical minerals, how they benefit from the cross-border trade in food, and the cross-border trade in manufactured products, especially for our auto industry. I think we've got a great story to tell, and we should lead from in telling that story as opposed to talking about tariffs, which really don't benefit anyone.
Moving on to the next topic, this fall you introduced a slate of what I think the mainstream media is calling anti-trans legislation. In reality, it protects children's futures, parents' rights, and fairness in sport. As was the case with Saskatchewan, Justin Trudeau's well-funded activists in EGAL immediately announced legal action. Saskatchewan did something different, though. They shrouded their Parents' Bill of Rights in the notwithstanding clause. I've asked you this before. I wasn't entirely satisfied with your answer. I'll ask you again. Why didn't you do the same? Because I think it hands the activists a huge win, gives you a bit of a political black eye if pieces of this legislation are undone.
I would say that there's two ways that you can defend legislation. One is the notwithstanding clause, which is kind of the really heavy hammer. But the other is Section 1. As long as you can demonstrate that something is reasonable, that it's proportionate, that it's evidence-based, that's the Oakes test, then the courts should side with us, because as we have demonstrated, it is entirely reasonable to put restrictions on the decisions that young children make. We do it all the time. And when you're talking about a child making a decision that will have a permanent impact on their fertility, that is a decision that has to be made as an adult. When it comes to evidence-based, we have already seen the Cass report that came out of the UK that was the most comprehensive review of the literature, and it found it lacking. The long-term effects and studies on the impact that this has on kids, the long-term information on what happens when these kids become adults, it's just simply not there. And I think it is proportionate. I think the very idea that the state would interfere in the relationship between a parent and their child when it comes to something this foundationally important, I just don't think that that's a reasonable thing. So we're prepared to argue it on the basis that what we were doing was well considered and that it was reasonable. And we'll see what the court decides. I hope we don't have to use the notwithstanding clause, because I think that this is exactly the kind of careful lawmaking that we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for. We have been careful, and we're prepared to argue it to the fullest extent in the courts.
Now, what happens if portions of these laws are overturned? Do you go back to the drawing board, fix the law, or do you just drop it?
Or do we use the notwithstanding clause at that point? Okay, I mean, I'm not completely averse to using the notwithstanding clause. I thought that the place we might have to use it is on our Compassionate Care Intervention Act. Even then, we are trying to write the law in a way that is also very reasonable and proportionate and evidence-based. And so we're going to try a Section 1 argument there as well. But I'm just watching this case in California that's going on right now of a 20-year-old girl who got puberty blockers, I think, on the first visit to a doctor, was on cross-sex hormones the next year at age 13, had a double mastectomy at age 14, and then at 20 just realized that she had severe issues, mental health issues that went unaddressed, and she's now suing. So I think when we see those kinds of cases coming forward all over the world, that makes the case that we've just had about why it is that we need to make sure that these decisions are made by kids when they're old enough to understand the consequences of it. So I feel like we've done our work, and I'm prepared to make the case in court.
Now, a lot of conservative premiers, I'll say Doug Ford as an example, he's not even talking about this stuff. Why was this an important one for you to tackle?
I think part of it was that I was in the media before I got into politics. And so I was watching as this was unfolding in the United Kingdom. I saw some of the concerns that were being raised there, why it is that they launched into this review in the first place. We've been seeing the international evidence as well. There's been other European countries that have gone in this direction. And so we just don't want to be in a position where 20 years from now, someone looks back on this era and says, why didn't somebody do something? I think that when you're making decisions that could sterilize people, especially children, I just don't want that weighing on my conscience. I want to make sure that if anyone makes that choice, that they're supported in doing so as an adult. But these are definitely adult decisions.
I want to talk to you about Bill C-59. That's the anti-greenwashing legislation. It was floated as a thought bubble by radical Green NDP MP Charlie Angus. People laughed it off. I laughed it off at the time because it was so crazy. But then the Liberals adopted a version of it, which ended up changing the Competition Act. And it's bizarre to call it greenwashing to talk about the technologies that are advancing efficiencies in the oil patch. And especially when a government that is telling you that if you give them carbon taxes, they'll give you more back in return, and then a national park won't burn down. I know the province has responded to the censorship of the Competition Bureau. But will the province be considering joining in or intervening on court cases against it?
I think we're considering that right now. I think there are a couple of organizations that have stepped forward saying that they are going to challenge it. I want to say it's the Business Council of Alberta and Alberta Enterprise Group. And so I've raised that with my Justice Minister to see if there's an opportunity to intervene. And we've done that before when Dow Chemical and the other plastics manufacturers took forward a case against the declaration of plastics as a pollutant and toxic. We intervened in that case on the constitutional grounds. So we're prepared to do things like that. I'm not sure of the status of that in particular. But the other thing that we've done is we've indicated that we are passing more legislation under the auspices of our Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act to address this very issue. So they gave a carve out to provincial governments to be able to talk about emissions. So what we're going to do is have all of the energy companies who develop our resources on our behalf as a condition of their license, they have to report their emissions to us. And then we'll report it. And we will be able to herald the incredible reductions that our industry is making and the progress that they're making. And we'll make sure that they're not able to divide and conquer and pick on any individual producer. So they've pushed us into that position where if they're going to make it illegal for companies to talk about their true environmental record, well, we'll do it on their behalf, and happily so.
Now, earlier you touched on the Alberta recovery model. And I think that's one thing that really sets Alberta apart in their approach to this across the province. Now, just like with your moves to protect the southern border, you are building treatment centers on reserve, even though both of those things are under the federal government's purview. I've seen academics and activists alike say that even though opioid poisonings in Alberta are decreasing, we should not consider that a success of the Alberta model. Why do you think there's such resistance to admitting that what is happening in Alberta is changing things, it's saving lives? There's this reluctance to admit the success of what's happening here.
I think a lot of people fall in love with their solutions, even if they're the wrong ones. I have one of my colleagues in the legislature said the NDP, they identify a problem, they come up with a solution that will make it worse, and then they demonize conservatives when they come up with alternative solutions. And I've seen that formula play out over and over. And I think that's what happened is that 20 or 30 years ago, the left embarked on this strategy saying that this would be a way to be able to reduce deaths. And it's been a failure, whether it was initially the safe consumption sites that have morphed into safe supply, that have morphed into a permissive approach on criminals. it's led to more criminality, more danger, and more deaths. And I think that declaring failure is something they're unprepared to do. We were prepared to do that 5 years ago. We looked at what was happening and said, we don't want that to happen here. It was happening all up and down the West Coast. We said, we've got to try something different, especially after COVID, when we started seeing these massive encampments emerging in our large centers and even in our mid-sized communities, which we hadn't seen before. So I would say that we had somebody who was, I think, pretty inspirational in the new approach, Marshall Smith, who was my chief of staff. And we're about 5 years in to an 8-year plan, and it's multifaceted. So we still have consumption sites, although we have shut down one in Lethbridge, and we'll be in the process of shutting down one in Red Deer at the request of their council. But we have the virtual opioid dependency program that gets people on Suboxone or Sublocade with an immediate prescription. We have the same-day counseling services. We have detox beds. We've taken off the fees that on treatment beds. We've built out 2 recovery communities, one in Red Deer, one in Lethbridge, 3 Gunn. We've got 8 more coming, including 4 on reserve. And we've also built therapeutic living units in 4 of our corrections facilities. And I can tell you some of the things that we've seen. Mike Ellis just shared with me some of the stats around those therapeutic living units in particular. We followed people for a year after they left them. The inmates ask to be in treatment. And then when they get discharged, they go to one of our recovery communities. And we followed them for a year, and we saw a 51% decrease in overdose deaths compared to what the status quo was. I don't know how you call that anything but success. And so it's a combination of all of those factors. So we're going to keep on doing all of them. And it may be the case that it doesn't work the first time. Maybe that's part of the reason for the detractors. But you know what Marshall Smith said to me is, you know what, sometimes cancer treatment doesn't work the first time. And we don't say, oh, well, we tried. We say, let's do it again. And let's do it again. Let's try something different. And so that's what we're taking to the approach of this really deadly disease. It is those who have a predisposition for addiction. It's very hard to get them onto a pathway towards abstinence and recovery with life. And sometimes it takes a little extra effort in doing things a different way. We're going to do that because we want to give people their lives back. And I think we're very gratified to see. It's now been a few months that it's been going in the right direction. But we look at what we're seeing in British Columbia, with the numbers continuing to go up, our numbers continuing to come down pretty dramatically. And that seems to be a validation of everything that we're doing.
I know time is short. Premier, what do you think is the biggest issue facing Albertans in 2025?
I think it is the issue of tariffs. I think it will be really painful to the Canadian economy if 25% across the board tariffs come in, if there is a trade war that happens, and I hope it doesn't. And if it goes on for very long, which I hope it doesn't as well. So that's why we're doing our part to address the border issues, as well as try to do what we can to avoid tariffs altogether, or avoid them on energy in particular. I mean, I think that we've got to be prepared to do what we can to meet the Americans in halfway on some of the things that they've raised with us. But if we don't have that, I mean, to me, everything is looking up. I just saw a press release before I came in. 3 oil sands companies are talking about increasing their production. It's been a long time since we've had that level of enthusiasm in the energy sector. Same thing with the Canadian Association of Energy Contractors. They said that we've seen an increase in drilling rigs from previous years. We've got major investments in AI data centers being developed, major investments in alternative energies, whether it's geothermal or hydrogen. We've got a vibrant and robust film industry. We've got more investment happening in venture capital in AI. We've got $3 billion that have been announced in investment in agri-food industry. We've got, I've been told by the forestry industry that we've got one of the best markets for investing in forestry. It seems like everything is ticking on all cylinders. And so with that big threat hanging over us, that's a real problem. But if we can have that go away, I think Alberta's just going to continue to boom.
Premier, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah,
and
my pleasure.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year as well. Good to see you.
Rebel News asks politicians and lawmakers the tough questions you won't see asked anywhere else. Now, one of the best ways to keep us moving forward in 2025 is to become a subscriber to Rebel News Plus. To do that, just go to rebelnewsplus.com.